Thank you all. For a while I've been away. I got to speak up at the Bergen Ethical Society last weekend. It was a nice visit. First time I've been there. I think you can all see I'm dressed a little differently today. I'm wearing my sports equipment. My lacrosse tie. You all noticed that, right? I was thinking of getting up in full garb, but that stuff is all pretty smelly right now. So, one of the biggest stories this fall about ethics in sports involves Colin Kaepernick, who's a quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, and he dared to take a knee during the national anthem in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And the backlash was strong and swift. People said, "Keep politics out of sports. How dare you sully my afternoon entertainment by taking an ethical stance?" So the question that I'm working with today is, are sports just entertainment? Are they somehow inevitably mixed with social, political, and ethical issues? I'm going to explore this thanks to Vince Russo, who's sitting right here. Now, Vince is a sports fan. He's a generous contributor to this society. He gives his time, his treasure, and his talent to this place, so thank you, Vince, for all of that. He also played a couple of years of high school football as a Phillies fan and watches sports on TV. And like lots of thinking people, he has some reservations about his attraction to sports. So he continued to support the society by bidding at our silent auction, and as a result, he outbid other members and got to choose this topic. He actually gave me two choices, but this one I latched onto. It's a huge topic, ethics in sports, so I can't talk about whether college athletes should be paid. I won't have time to talk about whether athletics distracts from academics. I'm not going to explore job creation or the economic impact of sports franchises on communities. I can only very briefly mention an important issue, which is the allocation of public funds to build stadiums. The Taxpayers Protection Alliance study indicated that nearly $3 billion of public funds were used to build 16 NFL stadiums rather than going to schools and hospitals. All of these topics are worth exploring more, maybe at a second platform, but today I can't discuss them all. As I researched all of these topics, though, there arose an underlying dynamic that really infected how we view professional sports, and that is whether it's just entertainment. Is it somehow excused from moral debate and ethical critique? Or is it an appropriate forum for moral debate and judgment? I think we're seeing a shift these days in how we view professional sports. I think we're seeing them more and more through an ethical lens. And I'm going to examine some of this change by focusing on three categories of concern, ethical concern, and I'm calling them the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'm going to start with the ugly. I don't mean that as an aesthetic judgment. What I mean by ugly are those ethical issues that are so profound and deeply cutting that we really need to pay attention to them. They are ethically flawed aspects. And I'm going to start with the issue of violence in sports. Violence. Now, maybe I'm bringing it up because I played 3 violent sports. I played football, hockey, and lacrosse. Through 12 seasons of high school and college sports, I loved it. I loved putting on the gladiatorial helmet and pads. And I admit, I enjoyed the experience of violence, of running into and hitting people. I defend myself, however, because I don't think violence in and of itself is unethical. A violent volcanic explosion, for example, in and of itself is not unethical. Throwing stones at a sandcastle is in and of itself not unethical. I don't think the fact that consenting adults cause each other some level of discomfort is unethical. What makes violence unethical in my mind is that when it clearly causes suffering to those ignorant of the risks involved. So, for example, concussions in football, which was hid from them by the NFL for years. But if you're a rock climber and you climb a cliff face, and within reason you take a risk, I don't think it's unethical to take that risk of possible violence to your body. It was the same for me regarding tackling somebody in football. Did I want to jar them a bit and dampen their energy? Yes. But I never once wanted to cause suffering in another person through these sports. I do take issue with violence when it's mixed with malice. Malice is ugly. Malice is the taking enjoyment over the suffering of others. And I imagine those who watched Roman gladiators fight participated in malice. I think that ritualized slaughter was fed by and promoted a bloodlust in the spectators. So do some sports fanatics share in this ugly attitude? Yes, I think they do at times. That's what makes them a fanatic. And that I don't think is ethical. We do see malicious violence and intense hatred spill off of the playing field into the fans. In the more quote-unquote refined British culture, they call it hooliganism. And at soccer fights, before, during, and after, the fans riot sometimes. They're drunk on beer and competition and mob mentality that can lead to attacking people wearing other colored jerseys. And it leads to violence and even death, and that is ugly. I'm going to spend the most time, though, on what I consider something very ugly and more in the public view, and that is when violence is mixed with misogyny, the contempt and prejudice against women. That is evidence in some sports subcultures. And I'm not talking about the odd, continuing tradition of scantily clad female cheerleaders as ornaments to men's sporting events, which is weird. But I am talking about a sports culture that for decades has turned a deaf ear to the abuse of and assault on women. Today, I'm only going to go back to 2003 when a renowned megastar was arrested by a Colorado sheriff for sexual assault of a 19-year-old hotel worker. Anybody remember who that was? Kobe Bryant. He was accused of rape. He denied the charge, admitted to what he said was, quote, adulterous sexual encounter. He settled out of court while denying guilt but apologizing to his accuser. Now, I don't really know what happened between this star and this very young employee, but it is interesting how the league and the media dealt with it. The case took almost a year to complete. And during that time, Bryant played through the season. He started in the All-Star game and in the playoffs. And NBA Commissioner David Stern criticized those who accused the NBA of coddling a violent attacker. He said, we don't have the Patriot Act in the NBA. That means you're innocent until proven guilty. Right now, social media is a kind of mob justice. That's what the Founding Fathers were protecting against. Well, I won't comment on Stern's misapplication of the principle innocent until proven guilty, which happens to be about criminal proceedings, not contractual relationships between employers, leagues, and players. But it is interesting to see how only a decade later, professional sports associations began approaching these cases differently. So let's just look at 2014, which was a very ugly year for professional sports. In 2014, Carolina Panther defensive end Greg Hardy was arrested for assaulting his ex-girlfriend after it was alleged that he grabbed her, threw furniture at her, strangled her, and threatened to kill her. A judge found Hardy guilty of assault, but after Hardy appealed, the victim failed to appear in court, and his penalty was greatly reduced. But NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell noted, quote, sufficient credible evidence that Hardy had both violated NFL policies and personal conduct policy. So the NFL suspended Hardy from play for a time, and he was soon released by the Panthers. At the very least, the sports community did not ignore this or blame the victim in this case. And there's a whole lot of conversation about the bottom line and this sort of behavior. Troy Vincent, who was an Eagles front office executive, noted how business concerns were no longer censoring moral consideration. He said suspensions, quote, are unpopular decisions with front offices. You're taking salary cap hits. You can't replace the player. In one case, you've got an $11 million player sitting at home and a $13 million player sitting at home while you're trying to win football games. But, he continues, it's the right thing to do. If this is what we're about, this is the way we have to move forward. Again, in 2014, professional hockey confronted the ugly case of Slava Voinov, who was a Los Angeles King charged with felony assault and domestic abuse. And NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman claimed that the league took the high ethical road. He said, when Voinov was charged, the decision was made on our own. We believe this is serious enough to take him away from the game. Bettman took credit for moving quicker than the judicial process because, unlike with Kobe Bryant, when Voinov was charged, he wasn't allowed to continue playing while the legal case played out. Some progress, perhaps, but I can't help thinking that these 2014 incidents, and there are many more, did not indicate a moral revolution within the sports industry. I think it indicated a consciousness in the public. Because I think at this point, if consumers of sports condemn the assault and abuse of women, it forces the business to change. And that has to continue to be the case. Because it sometimes takes a videotape to really rile the public. Former Ravens halfback Ray Rice was public enemy number one when a video surfaced showing him knocking his future wife unconscious in an elevator. Now, like the infamous Donald Trump Access Hollywood bus tape, videos of bad behavior are often a lot more powerful than written accusations. Pictures do tell 1,000 words. Ray Rice was arrested, indicted for third-degree aggravated assault. He's been out of professional football ever since. And the public outcry pushed the NFL to begin to change. They hired 3 women to help create a new domestic violence policy. And the players now face harsher punishments for violation of personal conduct policies, especially domestic abuse. There's a long way to go, but there are some steps there. Still, entire sports subcultures are still deeply, deeply sexist. The investigation of Baylor University is a good example. Just occurred. It turned out that Baylor University officials ignored allegations of football players raping and assaulting women. The university defended their franchise and established sort of a wink and a nod attitude of boys will be boys. Eventually, the coach was fired, the athletic director and the president, Ken Starr, was forced to leave. They resigned, actually. And it shows a little bit how deep the good old boy culture still runs. There was probably too much locker room talk. Read in today's paper, one of the highest academic institutions in our land, the Harvard soccer team. The university canceled their season because of deeply offensive sexist remarks that were widely distributed. So things are beginning to change in these regards, but just beginning. I'm going to turn from the truly ugly to the more straightforward and unethical. Related to gender issues is the unequal funding of women's athletics. In colleges receiving public funds, this problem was technically addressed in 1972 through Title IX, which outlawed unequal treatment of men and women in college athletics. And the impact of Title IX had tremendous immediate effect all across the country. Compared to 40 years ago, women are afforded so much greater access to competitive athletics. But New York Times reporter Katie Thomas explained that current lax enforcement and delays limit the effectiveness of Title IX. She cited one sex discrimination case at the University of Southern California that has been going on for 13 years and it's still not finished. That's not addressing the concerns of most of the undergraduate women who were at the university during those 13 years. Thomas in the New York Times reported how universities can still cut deals, including they can investigate themselves. This happened at Ball State University in relation to federal charges that the university was treating female and male coaches unfairly. The university was allowed to engage in an internal investigation that took, ready, 2 weeks. and it did not include a single interview with a coach, male or female. The conclusion? Well, the university was held faultless. Many similar cases occur still. The Civil Rights Office is trying to correct it. In 2009, Ruslan Ali was appointed by Obama to head it, and she has been trying to push for changes. There are increasingly higher and higher levels of college academics are being challenged, the real big boys. I think that's some of the reasons why Penn State rolled out as it did. There was a lot of pressure coming from the government on that. Ali said, nobody gets a free pass, is what she said. Well, given the spotty record of colleges, is it no wonder that a number of sports, in fact, all I can think of except perhaps tennis, pays women athletes much less than men. So let me turn to one more problematic area, and it's about trying to win. Bob Kay was telling me before that when he played athletics, like me, we played to win, but when the game was over, it was over. There is a hyper-competitiveness in sports culture that leads to misplaced priorities at best and outright deception, cheating, and cruelty at worst. One of the favorite targets for derision are the sports moms and sports dads and sports coaches who push winning so hard for their own ego, for their parents' ego, and for the coach's ego. There are some practices and their schedules can be almost torturous, what some young athletes are put through. And cursing from the sidelines, opposing players, parents and coaches, you hear it. Terrible role models in this case. So the win-at-all-cost mentality is drilled into so many young athletes that I'm afraid they bring it with them into college and into professional sports. One of the weirdest cases of over-competitiveness I remember was back in 1994 when the skating diva Tonya Harding, remember that? Her husband and coach conspired to hire somebody to break the leg of her opponent in public. Nancy Kerrigan, the victim, was forced to withdraw from the U.S. Championships. Eventually, Harding plea bargained and escaped jail time, was given 500 hours of community service, and was banned from professional skating for life. Slightly less condemnable than violence against other people's bodies, what about violence on our own? There's so much chemical manipulation in sports, and it's difficult to figure it out. It's shifting terrain. There are 192 substances on the Olympic banned substances list, including steroids, hormones, stimulants, beta blockers, narcotics. Some of these substances are in over-the-counter medicines, which Maria Sharapova found out after she was suspended from professional tennis for 2 years for taking a drug with melodeum in it, which is a heart disease drug that she had been taking for 10 years before it was put on the banned substance list. But certainly Lance Armstrong is perhaps more to blame for blood doping, given how much he had to do to cover it up. These techniques are well known within the industry, of course, and Insight's professional cycling, there was a "but everybody's doing it" attitude, which was really true. One reporter claimed that from 1998 to 2014, 12 Tour de France titles were won by confirmed dopers, which is amazing. Moving on, hyper-competitiveness can lead to good old-fashioned cheating. It occurs all the time, and it is dismissed as part of the game. And there is a gray area here that's interesting to explore, because is it really cheating for a soccer player to dive dramatically, pretending that he was tricked by his opponent? Is it cheating for a baseball player to lean into the plate so he can get hit by the ball and get a free pass to first base? There are some football and hockey players who are known for being great at holding their players, the opponents, illegally. The first baseman, Mark Grace, 16-year veteran, had a famous phrase that was passed around: if you're not cheating, you're not trying. There's an ethical weirdness, right? So maybe Tom Brady was just trying really hard when he was engaged in the Deflategate scandal. 243-page report was put out by the NFL, and Tom Brady, it was claimed, was, quote, more probable than not aware that the New England Patriots equipment personnel were slightly deflating the balls to aid his passing game in cold weather. He got a 4-game suspension. That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. At least the NFL appears to be disapproving of some win-at-all-costs philosophy. But there's still in sports a culture of valuing winning over sportsmanship and the rules. The NHL has an award each year. It's called the Lady Byng Trophy, and it goes to the most gentlemanly player. And Tom Kurvers, who was an NHL champion, said that nobody wanted the award because contractually they're awarded for penalty minutes. Their contracts can be better because they rack up the minutes. So, with all these terrible, unethical things, how can I call myself a sports fan and an ethical culture leader, right? Well, I don't know. Maybe I should just admit that I'm ethically flawed, which I am in many ways, and throw myself on the mercy of the court. But I will defend sports in 2 ways. 2 things I consider good about sports, and including professional sports. I'll start with one. I think that my personal experience in the sports greatly helped my development as a young person. I believe, in fact, it was integral to my development of my character. I was a bit of a wimp as a kid. I shied away from conflict. I was scared of monsters. I'm not particularly brave right now, but what bravery I have, I really do believe I gained a lot of it from my time on the sports fields. From the earliest time at football camp, I remember being terrified of the kid across the line of scrimmage with me. And I remember thinking to myself that the only thing I could do besides run away or fall down crying was to face my fear and break through it. I remember taking deep breaths and saying, okay, I just got to do it, and learning to do it. I believe it gave me confidence to know that fear doesn't have to stop me. I think it toughened me up. I know there are many alternatives to toughening oneself up. I mean, for me as a parent, thank goodness my kids chose cross country, a wonderful sport. But for me, the rough and tumble of the athletic field worked. It didn't lead me to be mean or insensitive to other people. On the contrary, I really believe I developed greater compassion for other people because I realized the other kids were just as scared as me. I never once wanted to hurt my opponent. I really mean that. Never in my life did I want to hurt my opponent. I don't understand the win-at-all-costs philosophy displayed by some athletes. And when I speak to my friends, it's the same for them. Now, maybe it's just because we're amateurs. Maybe if you make it to the pros, you have to have that win-at-all-costs philosophy, in which case there is a fatal flaw here. But from the very earliest time, athletics has been promoted as a way to develop character. Plato himself talked about athletics as a way to develop his own character. He actually said, while he didn't want to overdo the emphasis on sports, he said that it helped in the development of his mind and his ideals. Olympic soccer star Brandi Chastain agrees. She cites the Olympic Games as something that she was motivated by. She said that she believed that she was achieving a balanced character. She said, I began playing sports purely from what the philosophy of the Olympics stated. Balancing all the qualities of mind, body, spirit, competition, raising one's own standard, finding a new and creative way to reach the next level, but all the while keeping sportsmanship as the primary focus. She founded something called the Bay Area Women's Sports Initiative, in which she wanted to share that emphasis on sportsmanship with half the population that was denied it for so long. The mission of her initiative was to mobilize female athletes to be role models of health, hope, and wholeness to girls and women in underserved communities. And in a recent talk that she gave, she said something that rang true for me as a father. She said she took particular pride in helping girls know how, quote, belonging to the team can empower them and get them to be healthy and take charge of their own lives. Taking charge of their own lives. I remember when I dropped my daughter Maya off at softball camp on a spring break. And my wife and I, Maureen, marveled at how these opportunities were available to her. Girls like Maya, but weren't available to Maureen when she was Maya's age. For so long, a male-dominated society had defined women's bodies as objects, often sexual objects. And now our daughter had the opportunity to see her body not merely as an object or a sexual object, but as an athletic machine that was powerful and strong. Maureen and I were walking away from the fields when the girls broke into an almost Amazonian chant. It was so powerful. Chills ran down my spine. Sports are powerful. They can let you take charge of your bodies and your lives. They have a powerful role in our society. And like any power, it can be used for good or bad. Perhaps one lesson that I draw from my work on this talk was that sports aren't inherently good or bad. Depending on one's attitude, they can develop positive or negative traits, even when they involve violence. I know some will disagree there. But whether we like it or not, sports has an incredibly powerful role in the United States. Which brings me back to this issue of Colin Kaepernick. You know, he describes his, frankly, very mild form of protest as a reminder that we should provide freedom, liberty, and justice for all. For all. He bemoans that freedom, liberty, and justice are not being given to all people, and he wants to make those values live. He's not playing the victim. As an athletic star, he feels like he has a responsibility for things bigger than sports. And for him, in this case, it was the disproportionate violence directed at people of color. He said, I'm seeing things happen to people that don't have a voice. People that don't have a platform to talk about how their voices are heard and affect change. So I'm in a position where I can do that, and I'm going to do that for people who can't. While there is some praise for Kaepernick, there's also a lot of criticism. Muhammad Ali received a lot of criticism when he did not agree to be drafted. He was denied conscientious objector status, arrested on April 28, 1967, and banned from professional boxing for 3 years at the height of his career. He's one of the most beloved figures in sports in American history, and he paid a price for taking an ethical stance in the position of a star athlete. The year after Ali was arrested, one of the most powerful protests in sports occurred. I was 11 years old at the time, and I remember when racial justice came into sports for the first time in my life. It was only a few months after the assassination of Martin Luther King, when many blacks in this country felt that the civil rights movement had stalled, de facto segregation remained, poverty was rampant. It was October of '68 when Tommy Smith and John Carlos had just won Olympic gold medals at the Olympics in Mexico. And they stood on the victory stand with their fists in the air and black gloves during the national anthem to try to give their voice to the powerless. Smith did not say he thought it was a gesture of black power. He thought it was a civil rights gesture. That's how he described it. But the blowback was tremendous. They were booed off the medal stand, banned from the Olympic Village, stripped of their Olympic gold medals, ostracized by the U.S. sports community. Their families received death threats. How different is their gesture from Ali's or from Kaepernick's? Again, we may not all agree today. Spike Lee recently told Anderson Cooper that he couldn't understand the criticism of Kaepernick. He pointed out that Ali, the most beloved sports figure, was once labeled as, quote, the most hated man in America for taking an ethical stance. Lee said, how could you love Muhammad Ali and not love Kaepernick for the stance he took? So those who disagree with Kaepernick, is it because he took a political stance in the sports arena? Or did he take the wrong political stance in the sports arena? Because the national anthem has become a political statement. I mean, I find it somewhat ironic that at a sporting event, as the national anthem begins, fans can leave their seats to go get a beer. So, why is it so disrespectful to kneel to honor values which are part of our national ethos, like equal justice, but it's okay to go out and get another Budweiser? I was heartened at the response of Kaepernick's employers, the 49ers. Their statement said that the national anthem is an opportunity to honor our country and reflect on the great liberties we are afforded as its citizens. In respecting such American principles as freedom of religion, freedom of expression, we recognize the right of an individual to choose and participate or not in celebration of our national anthem. I'll pledge allegiance to that. So to all you sports fans out there are no easy answers, but let's work at emphasizing the good and condemning the bad and ugly parts of the games we love. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugh.